Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. What's up, Gym Bros? Big Paul here with another Anabolic Q&A. This is where I answer your questions regarding training, nutrition, and responsible performance enhancement while reducing harm and increasing your results. I got some great questions lined up today from the school Anabolic Bodybuilding members community. If you want to join the community, it's $30 a month. I take questions over there, answer questions, got a great group of people. A few of the questions I have lined up today. Could NFL stars like Saquon Barkley dominate in the IFBB? What's the right way to time carbs and insulin for maximum muscle growth? How would you adjust PEDs when cutting versus bulking? Is HGH safer for older lifters? All right, before we get started, folks, I'd appreciate it if you could take a quick second and like this video and subscribe to my channel. I get a lot of people watching these videos, not a lot of people subscribing. Also, I just want to remind you guys that I am now up on Rumble, X, Instagram, and many other platforms. Give me a follow over on those if you want to keep up with what's going on. Trying to distribute my content everywhere because you just don't know what's going to happen to your channels these days. First question I got up here is from Corey G. Corey asked the following: what do you think would happen if elite level athletes like Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson chose bodybuilding instead of playing football? Do you think they become elite pros? I've always loved the thought experiment of some guys I played with at the University of Miami would eat chicken fingers and fries for breakfast and still be jacked and shredded. I know they weren't on gear. They barely knew how to train. The coach would just tell them to lift, and they would squat 600 pounds out of bed. Yeah, I've thought about this extensively, and I also have worked with professional athletes as well. I've worked with guys across several different sports, consulted and coached and helped dudes out with nutrition. And it's wild to see the extremes of professional sports, the elite genetics that some of these dudes have. You're right. Like, dudes just wake up and can run a 4.40 without ever having to train for it. Now, that's not to say there aren't guys that work hard. There are elite genetics in both bodybuilding and professional sports. You know, you got a guy like Ronnie Coleman who supposedly turned pro natural, and from what I heard when he was first a pro, that he never even really had any sort of structured diet, that he was eating Denny's every day and placing, lower at the Mr. Olympia contest, 15th or something. And then as soon as he got his diet cleaned up and got on some gear, he started winning the contest. Same thing is true in football. There are guys that are just freak athletes that can get by on that athletic talent alone. Now, one of the things that I would consider is the genetic traits that are required to be a great bodybuilder aren't necessarily the ones that are required to be a good football player. They're a bit different. For example, I know with running back that having shorter legs, longer torso, lower center of gravity is better for balance. For guys that are offensive linemen, probably being tall and having long arms, having a long reach is great for an offensive tackle, say. One of the things I love about football is there's so many variables involved in what makes a great athlete at each position. So, for example, what makes a great left tackle would not make a great wide receiver. What makes a great running back might not make a good defensive tackle, or what makes a great quarterback, which to me is mostly just mental processing and hand-eye coordination, the ability to process data quickly and react quickly, sort of like hitting a baseball, I would say would probably be a similar skill set to be able to diagnose something quickly and be able to process it. It's all very different from position to position. Now with bodybuilding, it's largely the same. The structure that's required to be successful in bodybuilding is pretty much the same for, whether you're classic or open. I would say maybe open, the ability to get to a certain size would be a unique factor, that whereas you don't need to be as big to be in men's physique or classic physique, for example. So, the guys that compete in classic might not ever be able to get as big as a open guy. They may not have the genetics to be a 280-pound mass monster that's required to compete in the open on the Olympia stage. But largely the structural components, wide shoulders, narrow hips, small joints, things like that, are the same. And I would say that the genetic traits that are required to be a good bodybuilder might not be so great for professional sports. I would give you an example. The small joints, the wide shoulders, the narrow hips probably wouldn't be so great for football. You need to be sturdy to be able to play football, and I would imagine a lot of the guys that are professional bodybuilders might break down playing professional football. Not saying all of them. And for the most part, great professional bodybuilders, especially in the open, aren't very tall. You don't really see many guys that have success in open bodybuilding that are over 5'10". It's very uncommon, just because of the sheer amount of size that you would have to put on. And whereas in football, we have all varieties. There are shorter guys, but they play more of the skill positions. You're not going to see a 5'9", 270-pound left tackle in the NFL. That just doesn't happen. You're not going to see a 5'9" quarterback, because he's got to see over those tall guys on the offensive line. While there are some similar traits, I would say that for the most part, those probably don't translate well. And if you look at the guys that are also the freak athletes in the NFL, even though they carry a lot of muscle mass, they don't really have aesthetic physiques. They don't have the lines. They don't have the bone structure. They don't have the muscle abilities that would be conducive to being a great bodybuilder. So it's a very unique set of genetics that are required for being great at bodybuilding that probably don't translate that well to professional sports. Like, I doubt Derek Lunsford could go out and run a 4.5 He's probably not that fast, would be my guess. Now, there have been some guys that have been quick. If I recall correctly, I think Kevin Levrone was a sprinter or something along that lines. I know Kevin Levrone's pretty fast. At least that's what I recall. There are some guys that translate over. I think Brandon Curry played football, maybe. I could be wrong about that, so I apologize, Brandon, if I got that incorrect. But that's what I recall. But largely, these guys that ended up in bodybuilding instead of playing professional football is probably because their genetics were better suited for bodybuilding versus being a professional football player, and vice versa. So ultimately, I'd say the genetics are a bit different. That's not to say that there couldn't be somebody that could make the transition from one to the other, but I would say that it's a very different set of genetics. Football, you either got to be big and sturdy. You got to be able to be fast. If you're small, you got to be fast. Or you have to be a highly skilled hand-eye coordination type of guy, like to play the quarterback position or to be a kicker. I don't know that those skill sets are necessarily ones that would transition to bodybuilding. Now, with this said, I do think a lot of professional athletes, some of the intangibles that they have do carry across, the discipline, the structure, the ability to push themselves. Not saying all guys. I know there are some lazy guys that just get by on skill set and just genetic gifts alone. But I would say that's a transferable skill. And I think football players, and I've helped a few of them, could benefit from some of the discipline and structure that bodybuilders have when it comes to nutrition and training. I would think that could take your freak athletic ability and just take it up another notch if you were a professional football player. I do think that would be beneficial to professional football players. I know a lot of guys that play professional football eat like trash. I've seen, guys living off of gummy bears and, energy drinks and shit like that, and still can play fast food and still can play at an NFL level. I think if they followed more of a bodybuilding style diet, maybe a carb cycling diet, that they could probably improve their performance on the field. But ultimately, it's a game of genetics, and not just genetics, it's the appropriate genetics. The genetics that are great for bodybuilding might not be great for football. The genetics that are great for football might not be great for bodybuilding. All right, next up, I've got 2 insulin questions. I'm going to break them up into 2 parts because they are kind of interconnected from different people from the School Anabolic Bodybuilding members community. First question I've got up here is from Adam T. Adam asks, I understand the basic mechanism of insulin use in bodybuilding, but how much does it actually enhance growth in practice? What kind of results should someone realistically expect? All right, just so we have some clarification for the users here, let's talk through the mechanisms, the basic mechanisms of insulin that are performance enhancing. Insulin isn't directly anabolic per se. It is a hormone that increases nutrient transport, nutrient uptake. Insulin, some specific things that insulin does, it increases GLUT4 transport in the muscle cell, increasing glycogen synthesis and amino acid uptake. It increases amino acid transporters on the muscle cell, increasing uptake of leucine and isoleucine, which is going to increase muscle protein synthesis long term. These are small little things that it does. Once these amino acids are inside the cell, it triggers mTOR and thus a corresponding anabolic response. So we have increased mTOR, lowered AMPK, increased IGF-1, and in the long term we have a better anabolic state for muscle growth. Now, what we're going to see with insulin long term is just small increases of increased muscle protein synthesis over a long term. In theory, we're going to have increased muscle protein synthesis as a result of using the insulin, and it's just small, tiny bits. But if we think about it, if we're increasing muscle protein synthesis by a few grams every time we use it or whatever, I'm just using arbitrary numbers, that adds up over the course of the year. That might be a couple of extra pounds of muscle over the course of the year. Not something that you can see from week to week. I also have seen, just anecdotally, it does seem to, over time, increase the capacity to synthesize glycogen. It seems like guys have increased muscle glycogen synthesis over a period of time, and you'll see it when guys that run insulin, they get this really full, bubbly, round appearance that just doesn't seem to happen with non-insulin users. And it also allows you to push the food even higher. There is sort of an upper limit of what you can achieve with eating food without insulin. I mean, when I hear guys eating 1,000 grams of carbs, I'm almost certain that there is some insulin at play there. There almost has to be physiologically for us to be able to deal with that amount of carbohydrates and glucose uptake when we're talking about enhanced bodybuilding. So that's sort of what I see in my thought process on it. Now, at a high level, what this does is increase glycogen synthesis, as I mentioned, increases amino acid uptake, and long term increases muscle protein synthesis. And it's all little small, subtle differences. It's not anything radical that you're going to see a change immediately over day, but this is like one of these small things that compounds over time. And, look, I can't put an exact number on it, but let's just say if you are synthesizing an extra few grams of, if there's, stimulating an extra couple grams of muscle protein synthesis daily, that could translate into a couple pounds over the course of a year. And over the course of 5 years, that might be an extra 10, 15 pounds of muscle, which is pretty significant when you're on stage. Think about slapping 15 pounds of steaks on your body. That would make a big difference. And then also the increased glycogen synthesis gives you an appearance of being full and round. And if you look at bodybuilders pre-insulin and GH use, guys didn't have that 3D look, so to speak. At least I don't think most of them did, where they had this, they looked like a balloon that had too much air put into them. That, to me, seems to be a result of the insulin use, where you have increased glycogen, increased water and amino acid uptake, and just to have this big, full, round look. So it really kind of is a difference in the look and overall difference. I would say this, look, if you're not a professional bodybuilder, if you don't have the goal of being a professional bodybuilder, there's probably limited reason to use insulin. But, over the long term, it does, these little things add up and increases the amount of muscle tissue that you accumulate and changes your look on stage, which is ultimately what we're doing in bodybuilding. All right, second part of the insulin question I have here is from Joseph A. Joseph asks, if we take out the risk of hypoglycemia, is there an optimal timing considered for eating high carb, high protein meals and taking insulin with them, using rapid acting insulin? What would be the better nutrient partitioning to eat when the insulin peaks, or to take it when the meal is digesting or before you administer it? Or when do you administer it? Yeah, look, with rapid acting insulin, I go back, I did a thing the previous week about how I think most people use insulin incorrectly when it comes to performance enhancement. A lot of guys talk about using a basal insulin like Lantus, which really is not going to have much of a performance enhancing effect. It's really just to manage glucose levels and replace background insulin. And most of the time when guys are using something like Lantus, they already have some sort of underlying existence of either pancreatic insufficiency or they have insulin resistance that needs to be addressed. So the rapid acting insulin, likely for performance enhancement, is a better choice. Now, I'm not saying to run out and use it. Insulin's inherently dangerous. We want to talk about harm reduction. You're crazy if you run insulin and you're not a professional bodybuilder. You don't know what you're doing. So I'm not telling you to do this, but this is how guys are doing it. With using rapid acting insulin, personally, I'm diabetic, but I use it on my high carbohydrate days only. That limits my exposure to the insulin, limiting risk of insulin resistance. So if we isolate it to just maybe 2 high carbohydrate days, in my mind, that limits the exposure to exogenous insulin. And we know that the more exogenous insulin that you use, the more risk there is of insulin resistance. So that's something that we have to be mindful of in long-term insulin dependency and all sorts of downstream effects, negative effects from the insulin abuse. Now, with the meal timing, this is how diabetics take it. You don't wait to take your rapid insulin. Something like Novolog or Humalog, if I recall correctly, starts to work, the curve on it. It hits within 15 minutes. It lasts for about 3 to 5 hours. I think it peaks within an hour, if I recall correctly. I could be a little bit off on that. You can look up the pharmacokinetics on it, but it starts working within 15 minutes. So typically what I will do is take it right before I eat my meal. I eat my meal, and if you're like, I've heard of guys waiting to use it and to try to time up the peak with it, and to me that's just idiotic. You're going to end up going hypo. I see a lot of guys that'll take it with every meal and not every other meal, and then they end up going hypo because they're like, well, shit, I took 5 units with my first meal, I took another 5 units with my next meal, and then I ended up going hypo. I'm not sure why I used the same amount. That's because there's still some of that insulin from the previous meal still present, likely. Effectively, a unit or two. I don't, it's just using that as a bro way of equating things, but some of that insulin is still present in your system, so you don't need as much. So usually what I will do is use the insulin every other meal on the high day. I never take it before I sleep. It's pretty stupid to take it for your last meal. I'll make sure that there's plenty of carbohydrates present when I do take it. And, so usually I will take my Humalog injection and then I eat my meal. And in diabetics, it's meant to deal with mealtime spikes in glucose when you're eating a meal. So just, I use it the way that the drug was designed to use. I don't try to get things timed up correctly. And it's going to be present for up 3 to 5 hours. So there's no reason to take another dose before then. It's still active. It's still working. And typically that's how I run it. All right, next question I got here is from John W. John asks, hey, Paul, how do you adjust your PED dosing, especially when cutting versus bulking? PEDs will change, during bulking versus cutting. Bulking, usually in an off-season, we want to be a little more careful with health because we're going to be pushing food a bit higher. Also, when we're in a caloric surplus, we don't typically need as many PEDs, at least in my opinion. There's some other people with varying opinions on this. In the off-season, the food should be the primary driver of growth, and we take enough anabolics to facilitate the need there. and we can get away with less. A lot of times what I found in the off season, as far as anabolics go, growth hormone is opposite, in my opinion. Growth hormone on contest prep is essentially just an expensive fat burner at that point. IGF-1 levels are not going to be high when you're in a caloric deficit. IGF-1 is going to be suppressed when estrogen's suppressed, so there's really no reason to run high doses of growth hormone on contest prep. I will keep the doses a little more conservative on contest prep. As far as compound choices go, generally in the off season, what you'll see that most professional bodybuilders are doing is running higher doses of testosterone, moderate doses of whatever anabolic that they choose to use. Some guys use orals, some don't. I would say that most older bodybuilders that you talk to, experienced ones that have been doing it for a while, get away from using orals in the off season just because of the side effects and how they affect blood panels, including suppressed HDL and worsened LDL. They also tend to cause stomach distress. I know I used to love running Anadrol when I was younger. I can't do that anymore because I get horrible acid reflux and it completely smashes my appetite. And if you can't eat, you're not going to grow in an off season. Now, that's not to say some guys don't run orals. I would say, probably the two most popular orals in an off season would be Debo or Anadrol. When it comes to contest prep, usually we're going to tilt the scale more towards the quote-unquote drier compounds, which are usually the DHT-derived compounds, to affect mineral and water retention. We're going to lower testosterone and increase the DHT-derived anabolics. And, sometimes guys are using things like Tren. Towards the end of a contest prep, things like Anavar, even Winstrol, things that are avoided on contest prep, usually Nandrolone, any D-ball, anything that's going to cause a massive amount of water retention, because we're going to go for that hard and dry look on contest prep. Whereas in the off season, we really don't care about that. A little more water retention in the off season actually might be of benefit for increasing leverage and protecting joints when it comes time to lift heavier weights. So that's typically what I see. A lot of times, at least for me in my own experience, when I run my highest doses, when I'm running my highest loads, are on contest prep, because that's when you're the biggest risk of being catabolic. I've heard other guys like John Jewett say the exact opposite. He runs lower. I apologize, John, if I have that incorrect, but I've heard of other guys doing that. I just have not. That has not worked well for me. I find when I need less anabolics is in the off season, when I'm actually eating a ton of food, and I let the food do the majority of the work with promoting anabolism, food and training stimulus, etc. But typically that's what I see when it comes to compound choices and what changes from contest prep to the off season. All right, next question here is from Chase C. It's the good old Masteron question for off season. Chase says, what's your take on Masteron as a mass builder in the off-season, assuming Primo isn't an option? I'm thinking about running it as my primary anabolic alongside a test base for my next growth phase. I just have not found Masteron to be that great of a growth promoter in the off-season. Masteron and Primobolan are sort of cousins, so to speak. They do have different properties where they act a bit differently. Primobolan acts more like an aromatase inhibitor. Masteron acts more like a serum when it comes to how it affects estrogen. Masteron tends to be a bit weaker of an anabolic than Primobolan is. Primobolan tends to be a bit stronger as an anabolic. Anecdotally, I have noticed that Masteron seems to crush HDL worse than Primobolan does. Masteron tends to dry you out more aggressively than Primobolan does. I tend to stay a bit fuller on Primobolan. Masteron has a strong effect on the mineral glucocorticoid pathway. From what I recall, Masteron has a stronger androgen receptor binding affinity, especially in the skin, which causes collagen depletion and water depletion in the skin. If you'll notice, the guys that run Masteron year-round, they look like a leather pocketbook or a dried-up prune that's been sitting in the sun. They get this ashy, oily, old-looking skin. You can take a look at the guys that run Masteron year-round, and I've noticed that it tends to make me too dry. My joints get creaky. Now, with that said, I like Masteron, And I would say the argument would be is that with Masteron and an off-season, really, and same thing with Primobolan, neither one of them are very strong anabolics. But the argument would be is they just really the compelling reason to use either is that it allows you to run your testosterone higher. I would say if you look at the guys that are the biggest dudes, the dudes that are most successful in bodybuilding, the guys that are at the top of the Olympia stage, really what they have in common is they all run high doses of testosterone in the off season and high doses of growth hormone. Whatever anabolic they choose to run on the side really is based on preference, what they feel best on, what their health markers look the best on. But ultimately, it seems to be high dose testosterone, and growth hormone is what most of these guys are running. The biggest dudes on the planet. The guys talking about running low doses of testosterone and high doses of, anabolics, in my experience, they're never the guys that are big. They just aren't. You can take a look. All you have to do is just take a look at them. But ultimately, hey, look, here's what I say. Pick what works for you, what you feel the best on, what you're making the best progress for. Masteron wouldn't be my first choice for an off-season anabolic, but I know plenty of people that are highly successful that run it. I've run it in the off-season before. It's not my preference. I like Primobolan. I like Equipoise. In my old days, I used to run a lot of test, EQ, MPP, and then sprinkle in some D-ball. That's kind of the old school method that guys used to use to get huge. But anyway, ultimately it boils down to preference. I would say as far as anabolic effect goes, to me, Masteron is the weakest out of all the injectable anabolics that we have at our disposal when it comes to muscle growth. I look at it as more of a contest prep drug, something that gives us a cosmetic effect. To me, it wouldn't be my first option for an off-season compound. All right, next question here is from Dave L. Dave says, I'm 67 years old and have trouble putting on muscle. I'm on TRT but don't want to increase my testosterone, and honestly, it hasn't made a big difference. I'm considering HGH. Should I be concerned about the cancer risk associated with HGH? I have BPH. Could HGH help with sleep, muscle gain at my age? How does it affect blood sugar? All right, so baseline, when I'm looking at hormone replacements, that's usually where I would personally, I'm not saying this is what you should do, Dave. Personally, for me, when I'm looking at hormone replacement, I want to replace the things that decline as we age, that are going to help give us a youthful look, help us progress in the gym, help us be healthy, vital, and growth hormone pretty much goes in the shitter once you pass 40. HGH and testosterone are bioidentical hormones. We know what the downstream effects are of them and how they affect the body. And to me, that's sort of like the starting point of hormone replacement therapy would be to use both of those. We could argue with some people that maybe a GLP-1. GLP-1s are made in the human body. Some people are deficient there as well. But I would say growth hormone and HGH would be my starting point. Now, with that said, if you've had a past history of cancer, HGH is something that I would be very cautious with. I've had a past history of cancer myself. I've rolled the dice and used HGH. Now, we can look at the data on HGH. HGH itself is not directly carcinogenic. It's been well studied, well documented that it's not directly carcinogenic, but the downstream effects of HGH and increasing IGF-1, increased IGF-1 has been associated with increase in cancer risk, more specifically with prostate and colon cancers. Now, that does seem to be in combination with high estrogen, high IGF-1, and growth hormone use. It seems to be the trifecta of colon cancer and prostate cancer issues. Now, I would say a lot of it's genetics. A lot of it's genetically predetermined, but it's sort of like dumping kerosene on the fire, and then you end up with a problem. So HGH isn't directly going to cause cancer, but if you have an existing adenoma somewhere that you don't know about, it could potentially increase the risk of that becoming, more rapidly growing through indirectly through increased IGF-1. So that's something that we need to be aware of. So these guys that are running high estrogen the guys that are running high GH and chasing high IGF-1 levels as a result of running high estrogen and having HGH in play, I would say are rolling the dice. There is a direct correlation between high IGF-1 levels. When you get your blood work done, you'll see Z-score on your blood panels, which is associated with increased risk of cancer, specific cancers, from having elevated systemic IGF-1. So chasing high systemic IGF-1 levels does carry some risk. And we can question whether or not there is any potential benefit for even having them anyway. For muscle growth, it seems to be more about localized IGF-1 than systemic IGF-1. So I would say I would be very cautious with your estrogen levels. If you do decide to go that route, I would carefully pay attention to your IGF-1 levels. And honestly, if you are concerned about cancer and you've had a past history of cancer, I would be very cautious in how you approach things. I would speak to your hormone replacement doctor about it and see what they say. And like I said, if past history of cancer, any family history of cancer, I would proceed with some serious caution. But to me, growth hormone and testosterone are the baselines for hormone replacement to kind of get you where you're at. And I'm not surprised that a TRT dose is not getting you into, superhuman growth. I mean, it's just hormone replacement therapy. Bodybuilders, we, as we know, we have to get a little more aggressive with things if we want to have muscle growth. And that's also a question you're going to have to ask yourself at 67 years old. If the risk is versus the reward, that's a personal thing that you're going to have to ask yourself. I'm not here to chastise you and tell you what you should and shouldn't do. You're a grown man. Figure that out for yourself. But I would say baseline testosterone growth hormone, as I age, I'm telling you what I'm planning on doing is probably running a replacement dose of growth hormone, keeping my estrogen levels in range, running a replacement or slightly above replacement dose of testosterone, and then I would probably sprinkle in some sort of mild anabolic like primobolan, or maybe even though I just shit all over Masteron, maybe even Masteron would be a consideration as well. I honestly find Masteron to be very gentle and well tolerated, low side effects. I don't know how much of a benefit it provides, but that would be kind of where I would run things. I would look at whatever's the lowest risk and the best reward to risk ratio that we have. To me, that would be growth hormone, testosterone, a lower dose of primobolan. That's probably what I would run as I get older and advance into retirement. All right, next question I got here is from William P. He asks, "Hey, Paul, I just turned 55 and I've been training hard for 3 years, but I've always had skinny legs. What's your opinion on high rep workouts? Here's what my quad day looks like right now. Single leg extensions, 3 times 12 to 15 reps. Barbell back squats, 12 to 25 reps per set. Leg press, 20 to 40 reps per set, and hack squat, 1 set of 20. It wipes me out mentally, physically. Am I overdoing it?" So here's the thing as we get older. There's a couple problems here. And this is always a question we have to ask ourselves as we get older when we're training, and it becomes more of something that we have to be aware of, is the risk versus reward ratio of training, and also the stimulus versus the fatigue cost of that training and exercise. Look, if you want to do barbell squats, that's fine. To me, the risk versus reward ratio at my age just isn't worth it. They aren't that great for growing quadriceps, in my experience, depending on your structure. I would say there would be safer, less fatiguing options. I would say doing the super high rep sets like that are probably very taxing on your central nervous system. I would probably be more in the 12 to 15 rep range, using a more moderate weight rather than going balls out on that. I probably would sub something else out besides barbell squats. But if you want to do barbell squats, that's a choice you can make. Just know that they come with more risk when it comes to axial loading and potential risk when it comes to spine, knees, hips, things like that, there can be additional problems. I think there are so many good hack squat machines and other choices now that you could do that. Also, I noticed that you have 0 adductor work in there. If you want bigger legs, adductors make up about 1/3 of your total leg size. I didn't see any hamstring work in there as well. You also want to work on the posterior chain. You're missing out on about half of your leg size there by not having any direct adductor or hamstring work. I would definitely incorporate maybe a little less for your quads and a little more for those other areas. Get that in there. I would lower the rep ranges more into a 12 to 15 rep range, maybe even as low as 10 reps. I would carefully consider your exercise choices when it comes to fatigue. Consider the fatigue cost of those exercises and rep ranges. Consider the risk to reward ratio when it comes to choosing your exercise. Is this putting me at risk of injury? If you're not in the gym, if you're hurt, and you can't train, you're not going to grow or progress those legs. If you're beat up, if your knees hurt all the time, if your back hurts all the time, you have some sort of catastrophic injury, or you're out of the gym for an extended period of time, you're not going to be able to grow the legs. I would consider all those factors. If you want, man, I've got a free copy of my training program. It's kind of old guy improved. It also has my leg routine on it. Up on my website at anabolicbodybuilding.com. You can go there and download it for free, no charge. It's just, I have a couple different training programs up there you can download for free. But I would restructure things the way you have it right now. I don't think that's the most productive way to train your legs currently. All right, next question I've got here is from Joshua P. Josh, my buddy. Since the Arnold Classic tickets are available, do you have any tips for a first-time trip? Assume I want to get close enough to smell the protein farts. Hey, man, first trip, I would say the gold tickets are probably plenty good. If you can, I would rather sit closer to the center and be a little further back than be closer and be on the side. You just don't get a good look at the physiques on the side. I will say this with the Arnold Classic, really the centerpiece of that whole thing is the expo. The expo is where all the fucking cool shit is. The expo is where the prejudging's done. You'll be able to get up close. It's first come, first serve when it comes to seating at the expo. I think you have to have gold tier seats to be able to. I don't think silver can get into the prejudging seats, but the expo is where all the freaks are at. Everybody's walking around. There's a bunch of stuff to see. That's really where it is. I would say with the bodybuilding show, the gold, I think I got gold tier 1. I'm sitting in the center. That's plenty close enough. The lighting is great at the Arnold. The show is really well put together, well produced. It's not like the Olympia where you're out there for fucking 8 hours waiting for them to get through everybody. They run through everybody very quickly. It's very efficient. Lighting is great. But the expo is great, man. I would say if you can swing it, I would stay at the venue. It is a pain in the ass going back and forth from an Airbnb. But, if you're a bodybuilder, you need a food prep and do all that shit. But I would say stay at the venue if you possibly can. I would get the tickets early. They do sell out. I just bought mine the other day, and there wasn't a whole lot of the gold tier 1s left. They were pretty much all gone already. And, we're, 5 months out, something like that, 4 months out from the show. If you wait much longer, all the good tickets are going to be gone. So I would grab now. But, be prepared for a great time. It's much cheaper than the Olympia. I think it's a better bang for the buck. The expo is better. The show itself is better. It's just a very high quality, well-run production. The only downside is it's in Columbus in March. Weather isn't great in Columbus in March, but other than that, the show is fantastic, man. It's a really great venue. Everything is in one place. Just very well run, very well produced. Expect to have a good time. I like the Arnold better than the Olympia personally. If I were going to just go to one premier bodybuilding show, it would be the Arnold Classic. It's just head and shoulders above all the other shows that are out there. There's just nothing that even compares to it. All right, next question I got here is from Stephen K. He says, "Hey, Paul, what's your take on Greek yogurt as a secondary protein source? I can't tolerate any whey isolates, but Greek yogurt works well for me. Thanks, man." Yeah, I eat Greek yogurt every day. I mean, I wouldn't make it a staple of my diet. But I do have it with breakfast. I think it's Roman Fritz, who's on my podcast periodically. Roman eats quite a bit of Greek yogurt from what I recall. Mixes his fruit and stuff with it. But yeah, Roman eats Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt's great. I mean, you're going to get some probiotics as long as you tolerate the dairy well. I don't think there's a lot of lactose in Greek yogurt from what I recall. It's very low lactose, so Greek yogurt's tolerated well. It's a good option. What I do personally in the morning, I get a Faye Greek yogurt. I think there's about 17, 18 grams of protein in that. I will have that with some egg whites or egg beaters. I use those. And I'll have a little bit of smoked salmon in the morning, and I get my roughly 60 grams of protein from those combined sources. So what I use for my breakfast in the morning works really well. Here lately, I've been doing sourdough toast. And I think a lot of bodybuilders end up deficient on calcium, and calcium is important for muscle contractions, the calcium channel. So we do need some calcium. A lot of guys are calcium deficient, so some calcium with vitamin D and K2 to make sure it's absorbed properly. But yeah, I like to get a little bit of Greek yogurt into my diet every single day. All right, Chris G asks, what are the best off-season cardio options for someone prioritizing leg growth? No cardio. I joke. It depends on your age, man. I used to do the stair climber. I liked the stair climber a lot. When I was younger, I used to cycle a lot. But my knees are pretty fucking beat up now. I can't really effectively do the stair climber anymore without my knees starting to hurt. So I would say, look, let your knees dictate what you can get away with. I certainly wouldn't be out running marathons. I don't think that's going to be conducive to growing your legs. But I know a lot of guys really like the stair climber. I would switch my cardio, and I talked about this in the last Q&A. In the off season, I like doing HIIT cardio, and this is something I picked up from my coach, Justin Harris. HIIT cardio is efficient, it's fast, it's quick, gets your pulse up so you can get the cardiovascular benefits from it. I would do something like 40 seconds slow and a 20-second sprint. You could do that on the cycle, or you can do that on the stepper. The stepper, if you are in good health with your knees, you can get a hell of a leg pump from getting on the stepper. I've noticed that. Cycling too, shit, man. I used to cycle a lot. I really got into cycling for a while, and I used to do distance cycling. And some hill climbs on the cycle, man, your legs are blasted. And if you look at cyclists, man, they all have huge quads. All of them do. They got these tiny little upper bodies and these giant quads. It's goofy as fuck. But yeah, I would say, to me, cycling or stair climbing, some sort of interval training in the off season. I'd stay away from running. Running's not great for leg size. A little light walking's fine here and there if you want to do that. But I would say those two, some sort of interval HIIT style of training, limiting your exposure and getting your pulse up high enough to get a cardiovascular benefit from it, and run those, maybe like 4 days a week, something like that. All right, folks, that's all I got for you on this one. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you all for your support. It means a lot to me. I love all of you, even the haters. The haters need a hug too. I'll see you guys on the next episode. Take care.